Good evening. Welcome to the Southbridge Public Schools budget presentation. Tonight we will be hearing from Receiver Jeffrey Villar on the budget for the school years 2023 through 2024. The Southbridge Public School will hold a public hearing on the proposed budget for the fiscal years 23 through 24 on March 28th at 6:30 in the Town Council chambers. I call this meeting to order.
Good evening, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me with the microphone. We're good? Thank you.
Weak.
Yes?
I can hear you, but...
Okay. Hopefully... How about that? A little better? Thank you. I appreciate that help. All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be here this evening to share information about the Southbridge Public Schools proposed fiscal year 24 budget. I appreciate the attention. I have an awful lot of members of my team who decided to join this evening, and I just want to express my appreciation for their time and support tonight. So tonight I'm pleased to share information about the progress that the Southbridge Public Schools have made despite dealing with a once-in-a-100-year pandemic. I'm proud of the work of the staff and many of the team that are here tonight, what our teachers have accomplished. And I consider that as I think about the past 5 years, 3 of those years of our work has been spent dealing with COVID-19. For the second time in 10 years, this evening we'll share with you, we've seen an increase in our student enrollment. We also find a number of students choosing other school districts at its lowest level in the past 10 years. I'm also pleased to share information about our programming that this budget supports, and also share that they are tightly aligned with the Student Opportunity Act, which is legislation we'll speak more to later this evening, that is driving how funding is used in Southbridge and across the Commonwealth. The renewal of the turnaround plan this past November highlighted some significant accomplishments of the district, despite the disruption we've been dealing with. In the past 5 years, we've been able to establish a stable leadership team. We've been able to implement English language arts curriculum and mathematics curriculum across grades K through 12, all aligned with state standards, all providing students with rigorous curriculum, none of which existed 5 years ago. We've also established highly effective implementation of positive behaviors interventions and supports across our schools, and in fact, it's an award-winning implementation. We've dramatically improved our school climate and culture. That's something, again, associated with our PBIS. We've seen a reduction in out-of-school suspensions, but an increase in on-task behavior, and as you'll see later on, some signs of improvement in student growth and learning across our academic content areas. We've also worked to improve our finance department, human resource department, the curricular management systems, created robust integrations among ASPEN, which is our student information management system, MUNIS, the financial system, and multiple student assessment data systems. Despite the significant progress during the last really 5 years, the commissioner has set some pretty rigorous goals for us as a district, seeking improvement in the MCAS, English language arts, mathematics, and science, in both proficiency and in growth. We're also seeking improvements in our special education and English language learner programming, and we need to continue our improvements in student attendance, reducing chronic absenteeism across our school district. The Student Opportunity Act increases funding for our schools, but also sets requirements for the use of this funding. Along with the increased funding are requirements for enhanced core instruction, targeted student supports, talent development, and the conditions for student success. I'm proud to say all of these are things we began investing in and building out 5 years ago in this district. We are required annually to report progress on these goals, and is tied directly to the increased funding that the school district receives. The budget that I'm presenting this evening continues to support our investment in providing our students with academic and social-emotional interventions. As depicted in the tiered triangle in the graph that you're looking at, you can see that there are 3 tiers of support, green symbolic of your normal, regular instruction, and then there's a yellow and red, which really indicate different levels of interventions that are targeted for students' needs. In this budget, we have 17 full-time equivalents, FTEs, which are positions dedicated to providing students with academic intervention across the district. The demands of the pandemic and Student Opportunity Act also call for additional resources to support students' social, emotional learning and mental health. Our budget supports 18 FTEs aimed at supporting students' social, emotional, mental health needs in our schools. Additionally, we have curriculum that we've implemented called Second Step that helps students learn about how to regulate their own emotions and properly interact with each other. We also have implemented a program called Cartwheel, which provides remote therapeutic counseling and psychiatric medical services for our students. Additionally, this budget supports our continued work with the School Empowerment Network, providing support for restorative practices in our secondary schools, and that work has begun to move into our upper grades at elementary schools. And of course, we remain committed to our work for positive behaviors interventions and supports in our current partnership with the University of Connecticut. The budget also continues to focus our efforts to ensure the district is utilizing high-quality curriculum, instructional materials that are aligned with state standards. During the past 5 years, we've moved from a period of not having curriculum that was appropriate for grade levels, nor aligned with state standards, to a K-12 framework, to now curriculum that are rigorous, aligned, and meeting those expectations. Again, across K-12, science, social studies, district-wide. We've implemented the Wonders K-5 literacy series, the Science of Reading professional development for our teachers, Hill for literacy support for our middle school literacy programming, iReady literacy and numeracy assessments, Ready Mathematics series in K-8, Looney Mathematics providing professional development for our teachers, the Guidebooks literacy program, support from instructional partners for our secondary educators, elementary science units integrated across our district in our literacy programming, open education science curriculum in our middle school. Each of these programs meet the requirements to State Student Opportunity Act. Each of these programs are rigorous, and all these programs are new within the past 5 years. The budget also supports the continued development of powerful data systems which are used to drive our decision making. There are powerful visualizations, behind-the-scenes data integrations, connecting various data sources. These systems for hiring and managing HR have been improved. At the request of the town manager this year, this budget will also include additional support on the school side for the onboarding of our staff to help with benefit management and the completion of that paperwork. So we are building out our systems at an extensive rate over the past few years. Central office has definitely become much more stable and has greater increased capacity. Over the past 5 years, we've seen an improvement in limiting the transitions of staff in and out of the district. Retention of school leaders continues to improve, which is an essential step in stabilizing our building workforces. Teachers, educational assistants, and staff work for their building principals. We know that when building leadership is stabilized, we see staff stabilized as well. Southbridge is not the only school district that's experiencing staff shortages and turnover. The pandemic has made it very difficult for us in the progress of recruitment and retention, and it's become quite challenging. Even the National Teachers Association has recently identified massive staff shortages as a major concern. Across the United States, 500,000 teachers either move or leave their profession every year. This high turnover rate is disproportionately impacting districts like Southbridge that do have high poverty schools and high need students. 50% higher turnover, in fact, occur typically in a high poverty school district. So this is, again, not something unique to us, but certainly a situation that we have been dealing with for quite some time. Exasperated, I believe, by the pandemic and the challenges that we're seeing with the limited number of people going into educational programs at the university level during the past 10 years. The district overall staff retention rate was 74.1%, down from a peak of 82.6%. The teacher fiscal year 22 retention rate was at 65.8%, down for the first time in 5 years and down from a peak of 77.8. The district currently has 134 teachers who have less than 3 years experience, placing a great deal of demands on our system to onboard, to provide professional development, and to continue to give them performance feedback. This budget focuses on building those systems and maintaining that staff development so that we can continue to improve the outcomes for our students. I recently met with a group of teachers who shared their thoughts on our teacher recruitment and retention. Out of that meeting came an increased focus on communication, both internally and externally. I know members of the school committee were invited to join that blog, and you've been seeing some blog articles being emailed out. They're also available on our website, but those communications also go internally, helping everyone in the district know about what's happening at different schools. We also know that maintaining our stable leadership continues to be super important, and our teachers spoke with us about that. And finally, trying to give staff opportunities to be part of the change has absolutely made a difference. We see that with our middle school teachers, a group of which recently met with high school staff to talk about the changes they experienced at the middle school, which have led to really good outcomes, and they were encouraging staff at the high school that this is possible for them as well. So there's some collaboration forming that I think is indicative of a really good future that's on its way. This budget does also support the district effort to hire diverse employees. Hispanics represent 19% of our employees, which now is 3 times more than the state average. This represents a significant increase over the past 5 years when we're at a period where we're at 7.8%. Our mid-year literacy assessment data in kindergarten and grade 1 reflect results that are similar to what we were seeing prior to the pandemic, and at that time we were excited that we're beginning to see improvements. The years of the pandemic have had a disproportionately negative impact on early childhood, for sure, not just for us, but again across the nation. This is a major concern. But these data begin to show us that we are seeing the student growth start to mirror what it was in 2019. My expectation is that we'll see improvements again in these cycles next year, and even at the end of this year, we should see continued growth. The good news of this story is I think normalcy is returning to teaching and learning for our children in the younger grades. There is a pocket of growth in our second and third graders where we have gaps that we have a lot of work to do to fill. Other important signs of academic progress, the MCAS results did reveal that our 8th grade students posted the highest growth rate in mathematics among 15 comparison districts. So the growth rate is obviously a very important indication of that we're moving students from where they began to a much higher rate. And the over 65% is a significant growth score for sure. We also saw increases in English language arts and math student growth percentages in grades 3 through 8 and in grade 10 ELA. So there are indications that some of these efforts are taking hold despite disruptions that we've dealt with. Our internal assessment data confirm that we're on track to continue to see some improving results this year. At the middle school, the iReady math assessment data reflects students growing at some very strong rates. In grade 6, at the mid-year mark, students had reached 93% of the entire annual growth, and 48% of students had already hit that year's growth mark. We also saw in grade 7 that 108% of growth, in other words, students have already outpaced that year with 53% at target. 8th grade, we're at 76% of kids at mid-year have already hit the full year's growth target. These are pretty encouraging gap-closing growth rates, which means that that staff in particular are doing a very good job of meeting the needs of the students in the school. And I would expect to see continued growth in our MCAS this year in that school because of that. When we look at the literacy data at the middle school, we also see gaps are being closed. The percentage of students who scored at advanced and proficiency has increased by 5% from the beginning of the year to the mid-year. The percentage of students below basic at the same time period has dropped by 9%. So again, kids are growing and moving out of the needing assistance levels. The district continues to work hard at improving student daily attendance despite the impact of this pandemic. Each school has a team of educators who work to make connections with families and to help solve problems. Year-over-year data as of March 13th, our attendance average is up 1.3%. Chronic absenteeism has been reduced by 9.7%. After a pandemic low of 55% graduation rate, which is not acceptable, we have now rebounded to 71%. For context, the average graduation rate since 2006 in Southbridge has been 62.6%. Plenty of work to do. So those are some of our curricular and statistician-based information that I wanted to share with you as to why this budget is so important, what programming we're offering to support student learning, and that I'm confident continues to produce results. At this moment, though, I'm going to ask Mr. Racine to step up and speak to you about the changes in Chapter 70, specifically the information around the Student Opportunity Act, something we've been talking with this board and the town council about over the last 3 years, but this year it's particularly peaking and very important for folks to understand. So at this moment, I'm going to ask Mr. Racine to take the podium.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Seth Racine. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. As Dr. Villar mentioned, we have passed out a detailed budget book to all of you to review, and we are available in the coming weeks if you have questions about that. But more importantly, for tonight's meeting, we're going to be talking about the revenue portion that drives this budget. All revenue starts first with enrollment, and I come to you tonight to talk about a couple of highlights. First of all, for only the second time in 10 years, the Southbridge Public Schools enrollment increased. We have seen a decline over the last 10 years, as you can see in this first graph, going back to 2013 with an enrollment of 2,275, and this past year, in October, it was 1,809 students. This is an increase of 4 students from 2022. We have also seen continued declines in the number of students who are choicing out and choosing other school districts. So the chart below shows you the students who are choosing out. That is the negative peach color, you will see. And so that has declined from a high in 2017 of 274 students choosing other districts to now as low as 213. We've also seen a higher increase of the students choosing into the Southbridge Public Schools from other communities. For 3 years in a row, we have seen double digits of number of students choosing Southbridge. This has not been in recorded history in the couple of decades of seeing this high numbers. But once you start with enrollment, then we get to sort of the funding levels. I want to first make sure everyone is aware, as we've been talking about for the last couple of years, how are schools funded in Massachusetts? So the funding formula, which is driven by Chapter 70 of the Massachusetts General Laws, it was established in the 1990s. So this is how all school districts are funded, not school districts in receivership or not some other thing. This is a formula that applies to every single school district across the Commonwealth. There are 2 main parts to this formula. The first part is, what is the minimum every community should spend on education? The state sets this floor, which they refer to as the foundation budget, by taking the enrollment for every district on October 1, and they multiply it by a rate that they have determined. They started doing these rates back in the 1990s for what they deemed as a minimum adequate level of education. It's differentiated, and we're going to show you how it's differentiated in a second. But you take the enrollment, you multiply it by the rates, and you get this foundation budget formula. Again, the floor that every community should spend, which is updated every year. New enrollment, new rates, a new formula, new minimum. The second important part is, how do communities pay for that? So now that we've established all these different floors for every single community, these foundation budgets, they look at the community's wealth, which is a combination of property taxes, property values, and income values, and they determined what the combination should be that's covered that through state aid versus local tax dollars. A wealthier community should spend more using local tax dollars. A less wealthy community should receive more state aid. That is the general formula. That's how it's worked since the 1990s. As I mentioned, these rates are differentiated, and there's two main types. The first is a base foundation rate, which means every single student receives these rates, and it's differentiated. A kindergarten student receives a different rate than a high school student, than a middle school student, than an elementary student. There are also additional amounts that are received. So if you fall into these other categories on the right, including English learners, differentiated by level, low income, special education, there are higher amounts that are applied to those students. So why is this important? Well, for a number of years leading up to the Student Opportunity Act that was passed in 2019, the Commonwealth said that these rates are too low, especially for students with greater needs. Because before, as I mentioned, every year to determine this foundation budget, they looked at your enrollment as of October 1, and then they took these rates. Now, these rates were updated every year based on a price deflator index, which is basically inflation. So if inflation went up 1.5%, the rates went up 1.5%. If it went up 3%, the rates went up 3%. That's how it was going from the 1990s up until just a couple of years ago. The Student Opportunity Act said that these rates need to be higher, especially for students in need. And so they passed the Student Opportunity Act, which said, in addition to inflation, over the next 6 years, we're going to increase these rates at a faster pace. And we're going to phase it in over 6 years. We have now, this next year is year 3 of that 6-year phase-in. I have 4 examples in front of you that you can see that show you the rate increases by how much is for inflation and how much is associated with the Student Opportunity Act. The first is the elementary base rate. So you'll see back in fiscal year 2020, the base rate was $8,093 per student. The next year it was increased by 2%. The gray represents the inflation rate for each of those years. And then you see a blue above that, which is when the Student Opportunity Act, those increases happened. So you'll see it increased by 2% due to inflation in FY22. It increased by 1.4% for inflation, and then 2.9% for the Student Opportunity Act. In FY23, it was 4.5% for inflation. Just so you know, the state caps inflation at 4.5%. And then it increased by 1.3% above that. And then FY24, this is supposed to increase by 4.5% and 1.4%. The foundation rates are increasing by relatively small amounts, but again, the goal of the Student Opportunity Act was we need to increase the amount we spend for students with greater needs. And so you will notice in low income for the highest rate, you see Student Opportunity Act increases, the blue increases at 15.5% in FY22, 13.4% in FY23, and next year's 12.5%. You see much also higher increases for English learner rates. There's going to be 3 more years of this as well. Now, what's important to note is the goal here is to spend more for students with greater needs. And there's another part, which is that school districts need to use this money for evidence-based programs to improve the academic performance of these students, to close gaps between, for example, English learners and non-English learners, students in low-income status versus students who are not in low-income status, students with disabilities and students who do not have disabilities. That is the goal of this, and we have to report on that every year to the state. So Dr. Villar spent the first half talking about all the different evidence-based programs that we are highlighting. This is where that money is going, and this is where the money is coming from. So, take the enrollment, take these new rates. These rates are increasing, which means then we take the other part, which is, okay, how do you pay for that? Previously, before the Student Opportunity Act, about 74% of the foundation budget was paid for through state aid. In these bars you see here, state aid is in blue. Above that is the local contribution, the amount needed to be made up from property taxes and other local tax sources. And once the Student Opportunity Act was implemented, you actually see a huge increase in state aid to help pay for this. In just 2 years, Southbridge will receive $5.5 million more in Chapter 70 aid to support education. Why is this a major shift? As you may recall, Southbridge has spent above the foundation budget for years. On average, it was about $1.5 million every year Southbridge was spending above the foundation budget. But when the Student Opportunity Act was passed, as Dr. Villar noted, we have been trying to highlight to both this body as well as for others, the public, town council, that this is going to play into effect in the coming years. So you see here, the actual net school spending each year is the green bar. In FY18, it was $29.8 million, then $30 million, up until this past year, FY23, which was $34.9 million. But then we have this foundation budget, which is also referred to as net school spending, is the line. So you can see that the line, the amount being spent was well above the line every year up until this past year. And on average, it was over $1 million each year. Except in FY23, that gap closed to only $178,000. So this current fiscal year, Southbridge is spending just barely above the net school spending, which is all okay. But for next year, the net school spending amount is increasing from $34.7 million to $38 million. Now that we've reached this foundation budget minimum, how does a community calculate the appropriation? How do you calculate the minimum appropriation? This, by the way, is a formula that many communities who've been at the foundation budget for many years, this is how they fund their schools. There are things that are included in the foundation budget, and there's things that are not included in the foundation budget. The costs that are included in the foundation budget include the costs for students who attend charter schools and the tuition assessments associated with that, as well as the state aid. School choice tuition assessments, the costs for students choosing other communities, that's also included in the foundation budget calculation, as well as students who attend special education placements that are run by the state, and finally, municipal related costs in support of the school district. What's not included in the foundation budget is the cost of transportation and maintenance costs in excess of $100,000 per project. So, what does that formula mean for Southbridge for next year? As you can see here, we first start with the foundation budget, the net school spending amount of $38 million. You see that at the top in FY24. So now let's start to include back and exclude out those different costs I just mentioned. So first you back out charter tuition assessments. You back out school choice tuition assessments of 1.3 million. You back out the 71,000 for state special education school assessments. There's an estimated municipal related cost of $5 million. And this is for employee benefits as well as other costs in support of the school district, which will need to be finalized with the town. And then you add back charter tuition reimbursement. This is aid from the state, as well as the cost of transportation. This gets to $34 million. $34,017,145 for next year. This is an increase of almost $3.5 million. Now, as I mentioned, with this comes additional state aid. And so here you see the cost of the net education aid increase, which after you take in Chapter 70 aid and the charter tuition reimbursement aid, back out the associated state assessments, you get a net increase of $2.6 million. So that is $2.6 million that can help fund the increase in the required amount of spending. So that is the operating budget and mainly focused on the revenue. We also just want to highlight very briefly about our request for capital items. We have two main priorities for next year that we've mentioned to the town. The first is basic safety requirements of $280,000, and I'll walk through those in a second, as well as emergency repairs. We are about to enter into a contract with a firm to develop a facility master plan. You've been hearing about this now for a couple of years. That project should be kicking off shortly to look at our elementary school buildings as well as 25 Cole Ave and to develop a final master plan. The goal here is to take advantage of pretty substantial state aid through the Massachusetts School Building Authority for major school renovations and repairs. So the first priority, basic safety requirements. There's two parts of this. We are requesting $180,000 to upgrade our phone system so the staff can properly communicate with emergency services. There were two recent laws, Carey's Law and Ray Baum's Act, that had new requirements about emergency call services. So we're requesting $180,000 to pay for the telecommunications upgrades that are needed. The second part is to ensure that our schools, our parking lots and buildings are plowed, and then we have safe facilities, especially during the winter. We have a 15-year-old, over 15-year-old maintenance truck that needs to be replaced. Second part is emergency repairs. So as you have also heard me talk about for many times, the Massachusetts School Building Authority is an incredible resource for communities to have pretty substantial amounts of their projects funded by state aid and not by local tax dollars. If you were looking to build a new school building, do a renovation, do a major repair, this is a great resource. You need to apply to the MSBA and they need to approve the project, and it can be funded. But there are examples for both receivership districts that have taken advantage of this, such as the city of Lawrence, which is getting 2 new elementary schools through the MSBA, as well as a local example, the Spencer East Brookfield Regional School District is renovating their high school and receiving $45 million. So while we develop these, we are asking that we receive $350,000 for emergency repairs. We have a number of emergencies that can come up in our buildings because of their age, and so we're asking for funding for supporting that. And just finally, in terms of next steps, so we have this past month finalized our budget. You have now transmitted this to you. We will be presenting this to the town next month, as well as holding additional meetings with them in May to then finalize our budget by the end of June. And the new fiscal year will begin July 1.
So that concludes our presentation.
We do have to have an opportunity for people to give input into the budget, to ask any questions they would want to ask. At this time, do I see anyone who would wish to speak to the budget as presented? An opportunity to speak. Do I see anyone who is interested in speaking? Would you please come up to the microphone?
Gus Steve, 771 Lebanon Hill, Town Council. And I was specifically questioning, when you talk about emergency repairs, what is it you're actually
Gus, a little
asking?
louder, please.
With the mic closer to you.
When you're talking about emergency repairs, what is it you're actually looking for? I mean, you mentioned 350,000. What are you seeking specifically? Can you kind of detail what you actually need? And also, when it comes to, let's see here. There's another question I had in here about, oh, you also mentioned the emergency. Can you explain a little bit more about the basic safety requirements of this Kerry's Law and Ray Bombs Act? I've never heard of either of them. And how does that tie into what we're already doing, for example, with the high school and the police and fire departments trying to do the radio services that they want to add up there? And because I know we funded some of that through ARPA already. And let's see. Oh, and also, if you could clarify why transportation isn't included in the foundation budget. For the moment, that's it at the moment.
First, out of respect for the Councilman Steves, I'm certainly happy to answer the questions. Typically, those questions would be reserved for a subcommittee of the Town Council, in which we'll be presenting the budget and engaging in a conversation with them. In a public hearing, it's an opportunity to hear the public's opinion about the budget so that we can shape it moving forward. But specific questions around what the building needs are, we know from the study that was initially commissioned, I want to say 2018, is that now? We're, north of $25 million of building needs across all of our buildings. We also know that every time we fix a part of our building now using local funds, we're spending 100% of local dollars. And so a good investment is to bundle this up and try to seek state reimbursement, which could be between 60 and 80% on the dollar for repairs if they're done in accordance to state regulations. That's a long process. We did an RFP. We identified a firm that is now going to conduct the work to begin to move us towards the completion of a master plan. But all in all, it's going to be multiple years before you get major projects on the table. So in the last few years, our experience has informed us that we're likely to need hundreds of thousands of dollars for repairs. Last year, we had a boiler at Cole Ave, I guess, violently misfire. Something happened where it shook off a piece of the insulation. Well, that is asbestos, and now that turns into an abatement project, ultimately costing us around $100,000. Same year, we had a violent windstorm, which chose to blow a large section of the roof off at West Street, and that had to be emergency repaired. Recently, we had at our auditorium at the new high school, middle school, actually in the building, the intercom system failed, requiring a $10,000 repair. Point being is every year we have multiple events that are now occurring due to long past maintenance on the buildings. Again, West Street, I think it was, or maybe ERS, a window literally rotted out of its frame and could be pushed out from the second floor. We had to replace that. You can't wait. So there are a lot of unknowns in our buildings because it's been 30 plus years for a lot of major work. So what we're suggesting is a bucket of money so that we can repair those things as they occur during the school year. The alternative is to potentially have to close school for a period of time to seek emergency funding to get repairs done. And so we'd rather be ahead of that. I can't tell you what is going to fail in the schools in the upcoming year, but I'm pretty certain things are going to fail. They're old buildings with old systems. So that is my answer to that question. The phone system upgrade. Laws have changed. In my layman's understanding is when you dial 911 from a school facility, you need to be able to have 911 call back to the very room that called 911, and they need to know which room called 911. Not one of our schools is in compliance with that law, including the new high school. It will require an upgrade to the entire phone system across the school district. That's why we're asking for those funds. We feel that's very important to be in compliance with that. It is a different project than the radio project, which is working with the town, the police and fire, because the high school has a repeating system that allows radios to work within the school. That school also happens to be geographically located where cell phones don't work particularly well. So the repeater system allows an FM radio to work within the steel structure of the building. Unfortunately, police and fire have different frequencies on their radios. Some are UHF, some are VHF. And we need to upgrade the receiver, the repeating system, so that all radio bands work coming out of that high school to be able to communicate clearly and easily among all emergency responders. My understanding is we have funding secured for that, and those upgrades are well underway. And transportation, sure, I'll let Seth break that down. Thanks.
It's a very good question about transportation that I didn't mention. So the foundation budget, in essence, when the state created this, is basically trying to say we're going to take a formula to find out what should be funded in the classroom, sort of within the envelope of a school. It's not going to address the facility. It's not going to address how the students get there. It's just going to address sort of ideally what should that program look like. And we are going to either identify other funding mechanisms to help communities pay for school buildings. So this is like the Massachusetts School Building Authority, right? That's their attempt to try to figure out how to give funding for school building projects. And transportation is left up to a variety of methods. As you know, some communities have walk zones that may vary. They bus students. And Massachusetts has gone back and forth about how best to fund transportation. There has been some state aid that helps, but it's mainly now only targeted to regional school districts that are driving students very substantial distances, and only that cost is partially funded. But both transportation and facilities are not included in the foundation budget, which is why one of the other things I mentioned that was not included was, for example, major projects above $100,000. Ongoing sort of maintenance and sort of support would be included, but not major renovations or new buildings as well. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Marchetti, 120 Marie Avenue. I'm also a town councilor. I'm not going to ask a bunch of questions, but I will say that, first of all, I do think we have neglected the schools, building facilities for the last probably 10 years. We've spent a lot of money on vehicles throughout town where we seem to be neglecting the structures. And so I think that it is a good time this year. Maybe we should devote some of the money towards the building needs of this school, the school district. The request that the receiver has made for capital emergency repairs, he made the same request last year, so there's nothing new there, except it's a little bit more than last year. It's to be expected. If you look in the budget book from last year, you'll see he's got it all listed, 2024, what he wants to spend the money on. So it's really not it's not a surprise or anything what he needs the funding for. as far as the budget goes, sometimes, and I don't mean this critical, but sometimes I see the money being spent for programs, but yet then I look at the MCAS scores and they still seem to be low in some of the areas that we're spending a lot of money on. And sometimes it's my own feeling that maybe, I don't know if we should continue to spend money on certain programs that don't seem to work. Examples, we spend a lot of money on something called Looney Math, but yet our math scores are low. We're spending a lot of money on science and technology, but yet our science and technology scores are low. I'm not saying don't do it, I'm just asking maybe we should reconsider spending those kind of funds. And then finally, I recently read a report in the Worcester newspaper that the State Board of Education, the head of the State Board of Education, was a proponent of charter schools, and I'm just hoping that that isn't what our own receiver or our state education. I hope that they're not trying to push the schools towards charter school. I hope that we can keep the funds in our public school system. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Hello, Jasmine Rivas, 40 Rogers Street. I am also town councilor. And I'll save my specific questions for the hearings on the budget. I guess more suggestions around, and I did ask some of these questions in the advisory board meeting as well. I'd love to see sort of a breakdown in the slide where you talk about leadership stability and some of the data around building principles and the data around leadership in that area. I'd also like to see a breakdown in staff diversity and sort of like the breakdown of how many teachers are people of color, how many staff are custodial staff, just kind of a breakdown in those specific areas. And I'll save my questions on the budget items for later. Thank you.
Any other comments? Does the school committee have any comments? Again, we'll save those for the real budget issues. Thank you very much. This time I will officially close the meeting at 7:19. Thank you for your endurance. We'll break for about 5 minutes. Good evening. Welcome to the regularly scheduled Southbridge School Committee meeting for Tuesday, March 28th at 7:23. Welcome to our audience. Welcome to our members. The next agenda item is pledge allegiance to the flag. We are doing it for this meeting. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call. Tim Messier. Present. Kathy Lapiori. Present. Andrew Murch.
Present.
Martina Shea, present. Spiro Thomo.
Present.
Aaron DeMillo.
Present.
Wally McKinney.
Present.
All present. We have minutes for both the January meeting and the February meeting. Take a moment to look at them. If anybody has any corrections or additions?
Are we approving these both together, Madam Chair?
No, we'll do one at a time. Do I hear a motion for the January meeting to accept? Second? All in favor?
Abstain.
Andrew is abstaining. It was a lovely presentation at Charlton Street. I want to thank them again. The February meeting, do I hear a motion to accept? Are we still reading?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor? Oh, question?
Nope.
All in favor? Thank you. Receivers' announcements?
Thank you. Before we get to answering questions I'm sure that the school committee has on the budget presentation, I did want to take a moment to publicly thank Chief Woodson and the Southbridge Police Department for their continued support of our schools. Over the past 2 or 3 weeks across our country, we've been dealing with many horrific, school-related issues. Just yesterday, there was a very sad event. But Chief Woodson and his staff remain proactive, vigilant, working with us, reviewing our safety plans, working to respond to issues that we have in our schools in a timely manner, always supportive. I've worked with a lot of different police departments throughout my career in different locations, and the chief is top shelf. And I just very much appreciate what they're doing to help us keep schools safe. And as I tell staff, it is a community effort. We all have to be vigilant. We all have to work together, see something, report something. And I do believe that unified together, we keep each other safe. And so my appreciation to the police department, to my staff, and to the families of Southbridge, because we're all working hard to make school a fun place and a safe place. So many thanks for that. This evening we presented information on our school budget, and I certainly know that the committee here may have some questions, and I thought using my time would be a good time to present an opportunity for you all if you had some questions. And while you're looking, I want to thank the chair, and my apologies for the misunderstanding in the public hearing. I should have set that up better for you. So thank you.
We get better every time. We just make different mistakes, that's all. But I will remember for next year that we will have a full agenda planned for the day with pledge allegiance to the flag and all. Mr. Messier?
One, in regard to the 2023 budget being $178,000 above the necessary net school spending, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. And so I was just hoping that you could repeat or just make aware of how do I say this? The gap that we're going to have moving forward if we don't move up at the moment.
The issue is that number, and Mr. Racine, correct me if I'm wrong, that's our projection as to where we currently are in the fiscal year 23 expenditures. And so that's not accounted for completely until the fall of next year.
Okay.
There are variables that the town and, the school department have to worry about. For example, health insurance of staff members, vacancies. And so whenever you're that close to the minimal spending levels, you could, by error, drop below. And so that is, something that as you're projecting a budget, you want to make sure you don't do as best you can.
So I just want clarity on what you just said. So you're saying vacancies, and you brought up the insurance situation.
Well, because if you're on the town side projecting the budget, you're going to have certain assumptions, right? You're going to assume a number of employees, you're going to assume a percentage of employees, and I'm just using health insurance as one of the issues. Employees might take health insurance. Well, the school district has gone all year with certain vacancies. So if those assumptions aren't met, then you could underfund by mistake.
Just wanted to make sure that people understand that those, like you're saying, those shortcomings when it comes to the expenses of having a full staffed school versus losing staff members or not having a full staff, that reduces the net school spending. And so therefore, if we don't spend what we need to spend through those other areas, then that could cause a problem.
It could.
Dr. Villar, what happens to a town if they don't meet minimum net school spending?
Sure. I'm going to ask Mr. Racine to walk everyone through that process so that we're all on the same page.
Thank you, Dr. Villar. And I apologize if I forgot to mention this important part.
It's okay, we never forget the money.
So if a community doesn't meet the net school spending, and if they're below, how this process works is that, as Dr. Villar mentioned, there's a final accounting process where we submit an end-of-year report to the state to record here are all our actual expenses for the year. So if we are short that required amount, we receive a letter, both the school department and the town receive a letter from the Department of Revenue and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, noting that that the school district was short in that fiscal year, and the town needs to make up for that difference. And they do it either that fiscal year, or they'll add it to the next fiscal year. So, hypothetically, let's say the school district is short in its spending, in its actual spending, by $100,000. They would be short that $100,000 in June, you're sort of reconciling everything, that's the end of the fiscal year. You're reporting that to the state in the fall. In January, roughly, in that timeline, the community would receive a letter saying, according to our records, you are short $100,000. You can either give that $100,000 this fiscal year, or you add it to the next fiscal year's budget when that goes up. But that money is owed to the school district, and it just needs to be paid back at some point. If the school district, if the town does not give $100,000 that fiscal year, doesn't give it the next fiscal year, there'll be another letter saying you still owe $100,000. And so it needs to be made up at some point in some fiscal year, but that is the problem. If that gap becomes big in terms of the shortfall, the state can withhold Chapter 70 state aid from the town if they don't meet that amount, which would prevent the town from balancing its budget if that doesn't happen. There have been cases in other communities when those gaps have become very big and the state has intervened and there's been negotiations and they've eventually closed that gap. But that is only in a worst case scenario if a community doesn't meet that required amount.
Okay, the long and the short of it is, if they don't fulfill their obligation for the minimum net school spending, then they have to do it in the following year, or the Department of Revenue will come.
Again, there are letters and notifications of things like that. And again, communities make up for it in that fiscal year when it happens. It can be an oversight. As Dr. Villar mentioned, it can be a challenging time to sort of land the plane, right, exactly to be right on time. So the state recognizes that and says, well, obviously you can make up for that and you just need to appropriate whatever that amount is that fiscal year, or just add it to the next fiscal year's budget.
Thank you.
Of course.
Does anyone else have any questions first? Eric?
Yeah. I guess two questions. One is probably kind of showing my ignorance here, but I was wondering if you could define onboarding to explain to us what it means to make sure that teachers are onboarded.
Sure. So when we hire a teacher in the summer, we actually have built into our offer for employment a period of training that we require them to go to. So there's a before school period of let's see, there's 8 days total in the beginning where we have professional development. And then throughout the school year, we have a mentoring program. Actually, Ms. Seifert's out in the audience who manages that. Pairing teachers with mentors and/or, because we have so many new teachers, often we provide a session for them each month and the ongoing training for that. So it's really all about teaching them, what are the rules and regulations of the employment, and then the best practices that we expect in teaching and our curriculum and instructional approaches. And it's periods of training days that are provided for them. Now, our bigger issue is we do a really good job, I believe, of onboarding people who are new at the beginning of the year. Mid-year hires are a little more difficult because you don't have that, really block of almost 2 weeks of training. So it's harder to get folks up to speed.
Right, okay. My second question that I had, and maybe this is less of a question and more of just a comment. I know that December of 2021, Tracy Novak had come and done a presentation for us, and one of my questions for her had been, as the minimum net school spending requirements go up, it gets a little bit more and more challenging for us to be able to maintain our facilities, since the maintenance funding can't come out of that foundation budget so much. And so as the foundation's budget rises, it makes it even more challenging to come up with money above and beyond that for maintenance. And her comment at the time was, as this minimum net school spending is increased, that we needed to make an increased effort to get any little projects that we possibly could done within the foundation's budget of that increased funding as much as possible. And I don't know if I'm making myself clear, and maybe I've misunderstood what she was saying. That's entirely possible. But here it's indicating that maintenance costs that are less than $100,000 per project can actually come from the foundation's budget. And so I'm guessing that's what she was kind of referring to. And so I was just maybe wanting us to keep in mind the possibility of anything that we can budget into the foundation's budget, to at least consider doing that, if that's possible.
Yeah, the district does budget like ongoing normal building maintenance as a part of our operating budget. So that is included in our expenditures.
Okay.
The issue is, the buildings have gotten well beyond what you can do in that small, relatively small amount of money. It's even beyond really free cash. And, since I've been here, it's typically been about $300,000 a year of free cash, essentially, that's allocated or chosen to be allocated towards capital. At least that's my perception of it. And, that can't keep pace with the needs. And really a building project seems to be the way to go. But last year, you might recall, we worked with the town manager and the town council and identified a way to hire this firm to come on and do our building use facilities study that is now just starting off. And that master plan that they'll create is an important step towards, as a community, coming up to a solution. And I say that because it's not my place to say you're going to build an elementary school or you're going to renovate a school, or that is a community, and really the town council is going to have to support whatever decisions are made around that. So that's going to be a long process. But that's ideally, economically, from my perspective, the best solution to the building problems we have. Unfortunately, we got to limp along to get there.
Andrew? Oh, Wally?
Yes, through you to our town manager, our school, to Dr. Villar. You have a request for $350,000 for emergency repairs FY 2024. This may be a simple question, but if that amount is not used, if it's allocated, but you use 280,000, 160,000, whatever, does that money go back into the state funding?
It does not go to the state funding. It's local dollars that are allocated to us. So if we're working with the town council allocating money to some type of building repair, it has to be used on building repair. We wouldn't be able to use it for, say, curriculum or,
Okay.
so it has to be somewhat earmarked. Now, the question is, having the allocation made in such a way where there's enough flexibility where work can be done without an extensive process. You don't want it too narrow. But, you could certainly say, major building repairs. So that's not going to be changing a doorknob. Right? It's going to be a major repair. But that's a conversation, too, to be had with the manager and the town council if we allocate those
Right.
funds.
Okay, thank you.
The graph on page 27, titled "How much state aid does Southbridge receive to support the foundation budget?" For FY24, our local contribution is earmarked for $9.1 million. Is that the minimum local contribution that we have to make, or is that a projection for what we should be making with the minimum tied into that?
The 9.1 million is the minimum local contribution to be paid towards, again, this is towards the foundation budget. And
Yeah.
so, this would include the contributions towards charter tuition costs, towards school choice costs, things like that. But that is the local required amount.
And so in the graph for $8.6 million, that was the minimum for FY23, or was that?
Correct.
So all of this is just the minimum. So
Yep.
if we were consistent, if we were consistent with the previous 5 years, excluding FY23, where we were just short of 200,000 above what we should have done, the local contribution, we would want to see closer towards that $10 million number to try to get ahead of the increase in the Student Opportunity Act. Would that be a fair assessment as a projection? Like, we should be looking at this? I know you guys haven't finalized everything, but we want to be above that $9.1 million, preferentially to prepare for next year's increase, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's all from me. Thank you.
Tim, you thought you had another question?
I'm okay.
Actually, one more question. What's wrong with that service truck that we have for the plows? Is it just an age thing or a mileage thing, or is there a major repair that needs to be done that investing in a newer vehicle is probably the better option?
Yeah, so it's a Ford 250. It's 15 years old. It has extensive body rot in the back of the toolbox. Those big boxes in the back. They can't actually put tools in it anymore, and now they put them in the front. It's also used for plowing. So although the odometer might read 63,000 miles on it, it's a hard 63,000 miles of plowing snow. And so at the end of the day, it's very old, it's rusted out. It was raised at some point there'll be a registration issue with the rust, but they've tried to patch it together, but it's becoming pretty unsafe as a vehicle.
Okay.
I did understand from the town council meeting last night that the budget altogether is going to be very tight. The new town manager actually said words, Prop 2.5 override. And I know that that's not going to happen, so I'm pretty sure that we'll be working within our budget to help the town. Anything else? Thank you. Item number 5, discussion of collaboration between the receiver and the school committee. I'm sure that all of you are aware that in the last few years being under receivership, the town of Southbridge has not been, well, let us say, not overjoyed at being under receivership. And in some cases, I know myself, I have not reached out and put my best foot forward. We need to take care of our school, we need to take care of our kids, we need to take care of our teachers. And the only way that's going to happen is if we work together, all of us, the receiver, the school committee, the teachers, the administrators, and even the kids, because, well, it is all about them. In November of this past year, our turnaround plan was extended for another 3 years. I will spare you reading the whole thing. It's like 37 pages long, but I just want to highlight this one paragraph from the executive summary. It says, Commissioner Riley and Receiver Villar recognize that the Southbridge Public Schools has achieved significant progress before and even during the pandemic, but it still has much to accomplish. I think we all agree with that, but I think we are making forward progress. Due to this disruption in the impacts of the COVID, over multiple school years, the pandemic has prolonged the timeline for achieving the desired academic growth. Commissioner Riley and Receiver Villar are viewing the turnaround plan for an additional 3 years. That means that we will be in receivership for 3 years. To allow sufficient time for the strategies put in place to reach full and even implemented across all of the Southbridge schools. And the receiver will meet with the town council and other officials periodically to review the district's performance. That's exactly what we've had tonight. The thing is that the statement that ends is that hopefully at the end of the 3 years, the school committee, the town, the teachers, the whole school system will be ready to exit receivership. And in order for us to do that, I feel very strongly that we need to work with the receiver at this time. Does anyone else have any comments on this article?
Can we ask questions or?
You can ask questions. You are free to speak. Remember the days of members forum?
I do. Dr. Villar, I know that I don't want this to come across in any way negative or anything, but I did have a couple specific questions, and one of them was just to find out what you would see as the specific function or role of the school committee in the next 2.5 years as we're still in the turnaround plan.
Sure. Well, I very much appreciate the sentiments shared by the chair this evening. I think it's an important step. And more importantly, this group, throughout the course of this school year, and our particular members who know who I'm speaking of, have really worked hard to try to build bridges and try to get us into this collaborative space where I think we have reached. And I'm appreciative of that. I think it's an important step. I've long described my work as a job to work myself out of this job. That is how I become successful. And candidly, I don't want to spend years working at something to walk away and not have it be successful. So I'm pleased to be collaborating with members of the school committee in the way that we have really begun to do so. And this year in particular, this group has visited our schools. You've heard from principals for the really first time in my tenure, 5 years. You've heard presentations directly from staff members in our schools. You've seen our students in our schools. You're planning on going back to our schools in the next few months. Next year, to your question, I see having, and actually we have a large contingency of staff here. And next year, the idea that we have talked about is to begin to have presentations on the specific curriculum and specific instructional programs and learning more about the programming that's in place and really beginning to engage in that process of deep understanding of what's happening in the district. We've often focused on these financials, and that's an important piece, but the other pieces are also important. We've had visitations to schools, we'll continue to do that. So I see this as a growing process. And it's all been predicated on the hard work and trust that multiple members of this group have really earned, in my estimation, and I appreciate the efforts that you've taken. So my vision is over the next 3 years, we continue to work together, you continue to have more knowledge and understanding of the school district. School district continues to make progress. Hopefully we'll have many meetings where we're celebrating progress and encouraging news to the community, because I wholeheartedly know and feel, but certainly know and data shows, we are in a much better place now than we were 5 years ago at every single building in this school, no doubt about it. And we can be in a much better place in 3 years. And it does take a community.
Do you mind if I follow that up with, I actually have a couple of questions. And in your opinion, what would be the primary basis for determining readiness for us to exit the receivership whenever that time comes, if it's, in December of 2025? Are they going to be looking primarily at MCAS scores? Are they also going to be looking at our school committee? Are we prepared to do the job moving forward? What are we really mainly needing to focus on?
Sure. I'll preface my comments with they're my comments. I can't speak solely for the commissioner, but his words, were part of the turnaround plan that at the end of 3 years we'd be looking at what success is here. In my presentation on the budget tonight, I did specify that he has set out in our 3-year plan a need to see improvement in our mastery test scores, the MCAS, an improvement in our graduation rates and our attendance rates, an improvement in our special education students' performance and our English language learners' performance. And they're fairly specific, laid out in the turnaround plan. Ultimately, it would be a recommendation from the commissioner to the State Board of Education. So that's why I'm hesitant to tell you that this is a guarantee. But I do believe if we're working collaboratively and we're showing good outcomes in the schools, there are going to be a lot of people in the state really happy to be talking about exiting receivership. So I think we're on the right path.
So if the school committee does collaborate well with you, what would you picture happening in 2025? I think you already just answered this, but.
Yeah, if we have to deliver on the school side, and then we have to deliver on the governance, right? Those are 2 big pieces, and it's a lot of work. And so it's going to be, there's plenty of challenge in the goals that I have been given on the academic side. But we really are making progress. So there are good people working really hard in our schools. We need to keep those roots. It's like a growing grass. It gets better the more you grow it. And yes, we continue to demonstrate effective governance and good dialogue. I think that is going to go a long way.
And is there anything in particular that we can do as a school committee to show our support and collaboration other than things that we've already mentioned in order to try to accomplish those goals?
Well, I know there are members here that have attended conferences and reached out for professional development on their own, and those participating in that way, becoming more educated on open meeting law and all those steps go a long way of demonstrating a sincere desire to govern appropriately and effectively. I think that's got to be our goal, is to continue to develop that capacity. As over the course of this year, we've been working as a group with me and all of you to establish some trust among each other. That's important.
Wally, I saw your hand.
Yes. Dr. Villar, as I have seen throughout the year and a half that I've been on the school committee, I've seen a steady trend of improvement going well, especially in the middle school and younger. And I believe that a lot of it has to do with the work that's being done by your office, by the receivership, the planning, the implementation of programs, and you need our support. You need the support of the school committee, whether we have voting powers or we don't have voting powers. We need to be working together with you as much as possible. And I also believe that the town councilors need to be working with us as well. We need to be a unified body of collaborative. And without that, there could only be strife, difficulty, uncooperation, and that's not going to advance anything, especially our children. We need to be functional. And the only way we're going to be functional is to be cooperative and supportive. And I've always been a strong believer in unity, and that's what we need. So that's what I'm pushing for, and you have my support.
I appreciate that very much, and again, I have members of the team here that are instrumental in all the work that's happening, and they, in particular, they would agree with me, our teachers are the foundation. We have to continue to support our teachers, and we have some fabulous teachers in Southbridge.
Kathy? Yes, I was just wondering if next year we can count on having actual teachers in the classrooms and not a lot of subs, and keeping the teachers there?
The honest answer to you is, yeah, I would love to always have, a certified licensed teacher in every classroom all the time. It's difficult at times if you can't. We actually went to, you might recall, a company called Elevate K-12 to have a licensed math teacher at our high school present math, and it's a digital presentation. They're literally across the country, and we have a staff member in the room. That's not because we think that's the absolute best way to do it, but it is getting a licensed person who understood the content is really important. So we're hiring now for teachers for next year. We are very aggressive in trying to attract people, and we're fighting with all the districts across the state for smaller numbers of people at all time, like special ed. Very difficult, mathematics, some science, it varies, foreign language. So yeah, we do the best we can to hire. I'm aggressive in those conversations and negotiating for salaries and matching years of experience. And we have some of the best training. I know this for a fact. On new onboarding people is very extensive. So we are doing the best we can. So yeah, I'd like to have a licensed teacher in every room. That has to be the goal, but it is a challenge. And it's not just our challenge, it's a challenge across our country at the moment.
And one more concern that I have heard from some of the teachers is if they have a problem in the classroom, they don't always get the support from the administration, I guess it is, to back them up. So I would like to see that improved.
Yeah, well, and I would push back a little bit. We have a lot of systems in place that are designed specifically to focus on supporting teachers in the classroom. Doesn't mean it's always 100% successful. This year we've had more difficulty. Bringing high school kids back into school has been an ongoing issue. But there are staff members whose sole responsibilities are dealing with student discipline across our schools. And this is why our staff climate survey data, our student climate survey data has increased just about every year. So, there are individuals who aren't happy with certain systems, but I would argue that it's not the uniform belief across our schools anymore.
Tim, have you had a chance?
I haven't, but he raised his hand first.
I have been sitting as a member of the school committee since I was elected in 2019, and you've been our receiver since I started, and we've developed a working relationship over the years, and I do appreciate our candid conversations that we've had over the years that have been constructive and team building to a point, because I think I can just make this out in the public. We both understand that we're just going to be honest with each other. We're not going to try to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. Sometimes the truth hurts, but the truth is the truth, and when we move forward, at least I can say that I've been able to develop a working relationship with Dr. Villar over the years of just through being honest and straight to the point, which is just making Southbridge Public Schools a better district, and a district to hopefully one day attract people to transfer in instead of choice in instead of choice out. But if I can speak candidly, one thing that I would like to see from an education of the committee standpoint, I did attend an MASC conference back in 2019, and they did teach me a lot about curriculum, about policy, and how it's written and things like that. It's complicated, but that's what training sessions are meant for. But I would personally, I think, as the school district continues to progress, and as we continue to progress as a committee, I do think, I would prefer to see towards the near future a more in-depth kind of breakdown, maybe on maybe with a few individuals, whatever piques their interest in the ways of budget or policy or curriculum, to learn more as far as how because not a lot of people know how curriculum actually functions and works and how it's implemented. The general public and myself, I am no expert. I just know enough to say I know a little. But the things like that are very complicated, not only just from a governance standpoint, but just from a standpoint of daily operations within the district. I would like to see maybe if members have certain interests in certain things to try to meet in non-quorum groups with Dr. Villar, maybe like as a half subcommittee kind of thing to just kind of start giving us an introduction on how the new curriculums that you've implemented how they have affected our K through 5 as far as our K through 5 literacy and mathematics, because I know you've put a lot of time and effort over the years into that and improving it. Personally speaking, I would just like to, just so that way it's available more for the public as well as just a general education of the people here on the body on how that works, just so we can kind of get our foot in the door with it. I know this was discussion of collaboration. I'm not trying to put you under the gun here or say anything like that. I just think that this body has come forward, our district has come farther forward, and I would just like to see some of these things happen in the near future. No push, no shove, just something I think that would be good for the community and good for the committee, and good for our building our relationship as we continue to move forward through the next 3 years of receivership. And that'd be all. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you. First, I just want to echo some of the words of the committee members that have already spoken. Martina, I think you said some great things in your talk about where we go from here and trying to be collaborative and work together the best we can to make sure that we can move forward, in the next 3 years. And Wally, I really appreciated your sentiments as well, because I really think that, overall, we all have the same goal here. Everybody in this town wants the same thing. And in order for us to all be successful, we may not all agree with every single thing that, or decision that's made as we go along, but we need to keep in mind that the goal is the same. The goal is the same. I'm a teacher, and so as a teacher, and I think other teachers that are here would agree that we believe that every child deserves a fair and just education. We also believe that every student can learn. I think that we can all learn from each other. When I first joined this committee and I spoke in front of the town council, my biggest goal was to work with the receiver and the rest of the school committee to build bridges and develop a rapport that was successful. And early on, it was difficult. You know, that first year was tough. I'd be honest with you, I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't really, wasn't really sure what I was doing. But this year I feel differently. I feel differently about this group, and I feel differently about the work that's been done with Dr. Villar. And I just want to point out, when I first joined this committee, we didn't know if there was going to be a receiver at our meetings. We asked for people from the schools to come, and here they are. So we're making progress. Little by little, we're making headway. Our students are starting to do better. We dealt with a pandemic that was devastating for everyone included, teachers, students, parents. So it's taken us some time to get back to where we need to be, and we're finally starting to see progress. So I think that that's important. I think it's important that we keep in mind where we were, where we are, and where we're heading, so that we can continue to move forward and make positive gains, because we all have the same goal. We don't want to be in receivership forever. I don't think Dr. Villar wants to be here forever, as much as he may like some of us, you know? So I look forward to keep on doing what we're doing, so thank you.
Erin?
Just one last little thing, and that is to really encourage the community to support us as we're trying to work with Dr. Villar and collaborate with Dr. Villar. And I think one of the best ways that you can help us as a school committee and that you can help us to move forward and to exit the receivership would be to not just support us, but in turn to support Dr. Villar by not looking for alternative timetables. I know 2.5 to 3 years left of receivership sounds like kind of a long time maybe to some of us, but it probably will take us that long to get where we need to be. And to not look for alternative plans. This is the way that we think, after a lot of thought and deliberation, is going to be the most helpful, the most successful. We've thought about this a lot. Dr. Villar's thought about this a lot. Other people who know a lot more than I do have put a lot of thought and effort into this. And so I would just say, if you're here in Southbridge and you're trying to figure out a way to encourage the schools, be on board and to not try to find other paths if possible. So that's it. Thanks.
Anyone else? Sterling? The agenda item number 6, public input. Do I have any comments from our audience? We actually have people here today. It's very rewarding.
Hi, everyone. Carla De La Cruz Davila, a parent here in Southbridge, Mass. I just had a quick question. I didn't see anything in here about special education. I feel that they lack that in the public school systems, and I wanted to know if there was anything going to be done about that.
We certainly have special education. Have you talked with Karen Gian Gregorio? Excuse me, as I misspeak her name.
I think she lacks too.
And you also can speak directly to the department. Have you reached out to DESE? Because DESE also has a system that can help you and give you the best guidance in making sure that your student's IEP is met. I'm happy to hear from you as well. But if you've talked with Karen Giangregorio and you're not happy with what she said, talking directly to the department is also not a bad idea because, they oversee special education statewide.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to talk to you.
Okay, I'm happy to talk to you too.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I did see on Facebook that one of our special ed personnel, I can remember her first name, it was Julie, I do not remember her last name, was selected by the state to do a presentation on how information,
La Rochelle?
yes, La Rochelle, how to do, how Southbridge uses the data that we're getting from all of the things that you saw on the screen of various data, how they're using that data to help IEPs. This year also, the state is changing their whole IEP formula, so things will be very different. So do contact the people in the department because things are going to change, and whenever change happens, things can fall through the cracks, but hopefully in this case they will get much better. So do feel free to contact the department. Anything else? Okay. Oh.
I'm Tom Lapriori. I just have one question for Dr. Villar. When the school started, when the state put us into the receivership, was the main reason the low MCAS scores? Was that the number one reason?
Well, there's a report, and I'm certainly happy to get you a copy of it. It's on our website. The state cited many different issues in the district, long-standing issues. There were governance issues, there were academic performance issues. I mean, it's a large document. Obviously, it was written before I was hired, a couple of years prior to my arrival, but my summary is significant governance issues and long-term underperformance of the school district. So that would include MCAS, attendance, discipline, those types of metrics.
So how are you improving? How are you going to improve, like the MCAS scores? What can you do to improve that?
So you have to create systems that identify essentially what a student knows and is able to do, what they're expected to know and be able to do, and bridge the gap between where they are, right? So it's all about educating. So effective methodologies to teach students. We also, as you may have heard in the budget presentation, have a lot of work around helping students with social emotional issues, because we do have 90% of our students are considered high need students. That means there are lots of issues with poverty and trauma and those different things that become barriers to learning. But if you can help address them, you can improve students' academic performance. So we have multiple systems in play to do just that.
And I don't know if you can answer this question, but you hear a lot about the Thrive Act that wants to do away with the MCAS. What is your opinion on that? Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing?
So my opinion on the MCAS is that if you score on the MCAS and it says that you are strong in English language arts or strong in mathematics, then you are. It's a what we'd call a valid and reliable test. So it tells you to what degree an individual knows that grade level content, right? So it's a good measure. Measures are important because then it allows us to identify are all students being given an equal opportunity to learn and achieve. How the state chooses to use that measure in its school improvement dynamics, that's going to be completely up to the state and has been for decades. I would argue that prior to that type of assessment, many students with my background, I'm a Cuban American, but lots of students across our country were not achieving in schools and no one knew about it. Now we know about it, and now we have to do something about it. That's not easy. It's changed the paradigm of education. It's no longer a sorting. We used to basically sort high achieving, not achieving, and not achieving would go off to one type of career and high achieving go off to another. The expectation with No Child Left Behind, which is now, gosh, early 2000s, was that all children are to be ready for college or career. It's a very high bar. It is a very high bar, and schools have yet to uniformly reach it. But Massachusetts is quite dedicated to making sure that it does. I mean, this district, this state outperforms some countries. It has a strong educational system and strong goals for kids.
All right, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Madam Chair. Just to clarify a little bit, the House 495, which is more commonly known as the Thrive Act, is not going to eliminate MCAS entirely. There will still be a standardized test, but it's not going to be used as a graduation requirement. Just because the MCAS is still a measurable test as far as student aptitude, but what this legislation is trying to do right now is to not pressure students into passing the test in order to move on and potentially graduate. This bill would just use it as a metric to measure for things like receivership and student performance overall, but it would leave graduation requirements to meet the minimum requirements that would be required by the state of Massachusetts, but are also chosen by the district. The MCAS would not play a factor into students thriving in our schools and moving on to next grade level or graduating. I just want to make sure that that was clarified. Thank you.
Other comments? Okay. Chairman's announcements.
Madam Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Point of order.
I'm sorry.
It's about all right.
You,
I sneak in. John Daniel, 205 Chapin Street, Southbridge, and a member of the Town Council. I just come forward tonight to say thank you to the committee. Being an elected official in town can be a tough job. In Southbridge in particular, it can be real tough. And the fact that you've come forward and you've done a wonderful job representing our students and the parents is something that needs to be commended and acknowledged. And that doesn't happen too often, so I'm taking this opportunity to recognize you and to thank you very much for the good job that you've done. And I hope that you continue to do the good job that you're doing on into the future. And to Dr. Villar, I say thank you to both you and your team. You've put together a great document. It takes a lot of work. It's a lot of numbers. There's a lot of variability. Things don't. The information you need to put it together doesn't always come at the right time. And so there's some educated guesswork, I guess, that goes into it as well. But I sincerely appreciate the work that you're doing. I believe that you are a good leader for the district. And I know that there'll be debate coming up in front of our subcommittees and in front of the council as a whole about the budget itself. But the fact is that in order to debate it, you need a good, strong, solid document as a base to begin with. And I think that you've provided that, and I appreciate that. So thank you very much as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
thank you for your good work on the town council, too. Good leadership is good leadership. Is there anyone else from the audience? Anyone else on the committee? Okay. Now we'll have chairman's announcements. Next meeting is actually very quick. It's just in 2 weeks because we had to delay this meeting for the snow. We will be at Eastford Road, which is the school for our youngest children. So I'm really looking forward to that. I love picture books. But you know, I always have to say something about children's books. When Aaron and I went to see Dr. Villar, we did talk to him about training for a school committee, and he did assure us that there was money available for us to take whatever courses or whatever, training, particularly that the School Committee Association, the Mass Association of School Committees, does training for school committees. So we will be taking advantage of that. Again, I've been saying this the past couple of meetings, I love seeing positive things on Facebook. I love seeing positive things in the Southbridge News. It's so refreshing to hear and see what our kids are really doing that's positive and uplifting. Oh, also a special mention to the Junior Honor Society. That's quite a feather in our hats, and great work for our guidance people and the administration at the middle school. Okay. Next meeting date is April the 11th at 4 o'clock. That's going to be one of our 4 o'clock meetings because it's in the school. That's at 120 Eastford Road. Anything to be added to the agenda? No?
I move to adjourn.
Second? All in favor? Adjourn the meeting at 8:21. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.